Now it's time to bring you today's Perspective Report. And people with disabilities, low-income families, migrants, refugees, anyone who is marginalised in society, all of them said to be at risk, according to Amnesty International, as it raises deep concerns about a new welfare system in Denmark that uses artificial intelligence. The AI algorithm tools used to flag people for potential social benefit fraud investigations. Now, Amnesty says the situation already creating an atmosphere of fear through mass surveillance rather than a welfare system which is supposed to support the very people it was meant to protect. The issue raising concerns more generally as well, of course, about the use of AI, notably by government institutions around the world. Well, joining us now is David Nolan. He's senior investigative researcher at Amnesty Tech. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme. Let's talk first of all about the system in Denmark. What's your problem with it then?
First, just to say thank you so much for having me today. And yeah, absolutely right. So we've been looking at the system in Denmark for the best part of 2.5 years now. And there's a series of different concerns that we'll have, and I'll touch on just a few. We, as an overarching start and to set some backdrop, the Danish Welfare Agency is using as of 2019, was using up to 60 algorithmic models for a variety of different administrative tasks that are under their remit. And we examined 4 of them. We got partial access to 4 such algorithmic models. And in particular, we're very concerned about models that are built and algorithmic systems that are built with the explicit goal of identifying fraudulent or erroneous welfare payments or recipients. And there's a few concerns that we have. In particular, the system has been built on mass extraction of data. It merges a number of different administratively collected government databases, and this builds a system of surveillance, violating the individual's right to privacy and undermining their human dignity. Second, in particular, in some of the models, we're very concerned about some of the inputs that are used. Most notably, in one of the models, inputs that are related to beneficiaries' foreign affiliation are used within welfare algorithms. In particular, there is the use of citizenship directly, which directly discriminates on the basis of nationality and migration status, and indirectly discriminates on the basis of other protected characteristics like race.
Presumably supporters, though, would say it's a good way to find people who are cheating. And if people are innocent, then and they're wrongly highlighted, that any further investigation would uncover that.
Yes, absolutely. And whilst we don't deny that that identifying fraudsters in and of itself as a task, we don't deny is something that is important for states to do. What we're calling for is for these technologies to be rights respecting. So we've outlined a series of human rights violations and risks in the report. And these technologies, one, need to be more transparent and need to have adequate oversight. And there are other means which governments could use for the same task, which respect human rights and don't violate the rights that we set out in the report.
And do you think they would be as effective? Because presumably if you start restricting the information, then they could be less effective.
Well, this is a very interesting question, and I don't want to dive too much into the efficacy of different methods to detect fraud or erroneous payments. I think the first thing to state in response to this is that we're not quite sure how effective these systems actually are identifying fraud. Systems like this that are used by the Danish Welfare Agency and systems that we've seen used across Europe, there's not much publicly available information, and governments haven't been very transparent about how efficacious they are at their stated goal of finding fraud and error. So I think that's the important backdrop for that question. As to other methods, we don't have the requisite transparency to compare them against the systems that are currently in use.
Presumably, this isn't a one-off, is it? I mean, it's part of an ongoing trend of digitalisation, automation across not just welfare distribution, but all sorts of other areas within governments, within local governments as well. What's your fear more generally about this?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. As a team and as a researcher, we focus predominantly on the automation and digitalization of essential public services, which we've seen an increasing trend in the EU and elsewhere. We've seen systems that have been used within domains of housing, healthcare, education, and social security, like the one in Denmark. There are a number of different concerns, and we've seen cases exposed by journalists, civil society, other groups, where they present serious risks to people's right to privacy, right to non-discrimination, as is the case in the Denmark report, right to social security, right to health, freedom of expression. So that's just to name a series of concerns that we have. What we're calling for is greater transparency and to allow for public scrutiny of such technologies. We've seen them introduced and in very opaque fashions, and we need this to be sufficiently scrutinized and people to be aware that they are in use.
There is a European Union AI Act, isn't there? And there are no doubt other acts around the world in other places as well. Does that not help counter some of these problems?
Absolutely. With the introduction of the EU AI Act, which came into force earlier this year, they've introduced a risk-based approach to categorize AI systems, and then a series of obligations placed on what they refer to as the deployers, that's those who deploy the systems, and the providers, that's who can provide it. And this, the regulation, what we think it's a really, really important first step. There are some concerns that Amnesty have highlighted about the regulatory framework that's been introduced, but it will go some way, particularly for the use of artificial intelligence within the public sector, to increase some of the transparency and things that I was referring to earlier. I think of particular note, there is Article 5 in the Act sets out prohibited systems, and those are systems that would be banned under the Act, and this comes into force in February 2025. Within this, there are what referred to as social scoring systems, and we argue within the Denmark report that the system, under the current evidence that we have gained from the investigation, does constitute a social scoring act and should be prohibited under the Act. And we argue for it to be paused until a full assessment can be made.
I'm just going to interrupt you briefly because we're running out of time. I just wanted to ask you very quickly. Obviously, we're right at the beginning of AI at the moment. I mean, how bad or how much more complicated do you think this could become?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. And we've obviously seen over the best part of the past 5 years, the kind of systems that we report on in Denmark being used in a variety of other places, in the Netherlands, in France. We've also seen the recent trend of technologies like ChatGPT. We've seen early stages of their introduction and kind of calls from governments around the world to start using these kind of technologies. So we're very concerned, not only the technologies that are currently in use, but obviously those that will come into deployment in the future, because they bring with it new human rights risks and concerns.
David Nolan, good to talk to you on the programme today. Thank you very much. Senior Investigative Researcher at Amnesty Tech. Thanks.
Thank you so much.